The Occult War by Léon de Ponsin and Emmanuel Alinsky. Chapter 1, The 19th Century. The Revolution Awakens. The entire history of the 19th century was shaped by the evolution of the revolutionary movement from 1879 down to Russian Bolshevism. This underground struggle began with the French Revolution, which was backed by the Illuminati assembled at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad under the presidency of the Bavarian professor Weishaupt. This city had been under siege for a few decades, since the time of Voltaire, Rousseau, the Encyclopédie, and the spread of Masonic lodges. One of its most beautiful districts was stormed, and its inhabitants were drafted in order to attack the surrounding areas. As might have happened during an actual siege, this part of the citadel was taken back by those people who had been put under siege after fierce fighting during Napoleonic times. The assailants then withdrew and took cover. In the stronghold, however, they left a contagious germ which spread to the point of making France the enfant terrible of Europe in the 19th century. France witnessed the birth of revolutions which progressively and imperceptibly altered the appearance of the Christian world and the inner structure of European society under the pseudonyms of liberal, noble, and generous ideas. Revolutionary elements benefited from this, starting with the Jews. The deep history of the 19th century down to the World War is the history of this struggle, largely a mute and deaf one, between the attackers who knew well what they were doing and the besieged who were unaware of what was taking place. This process lasted exactly 102 years, 1815 to 1917, and has led to two results. The first is the transformation of 1/6 of the inhabited world into a revolutionary hotbed steeped in Freemasonry and Judaism, in which the infection is developing and growing, aware of what forces it has easily managed to organize in view of the second phase of its plan. The second result consists in the transformation of the rest of the planet into a weak and divided realm in which, much like the house Christ described, is inwardly torn by resentful rivalries and petty hatreds. The world was rendered incapable, at least until just recently, as new anti-Marxist currents have emerged after the war, of any offensive or even defensive initiative against an enemy whose forces and daring had considerably increased and which, confident of its immunity, believed it could continue to attack without ever having to defend itself. Ultimately, the cause of all this is the fact that the world was so dominated by capitalism, so drained by democracy, so shaken by socialism, and divided by misunderstood nationalisms, that it was no longer capable of offering any firm resistance to such an attack. In 1813, traditional and Christian Europe had finally chosen to firmly react against the revolution, as embodied by Napoleon. The fight was against the revolution, not France, just as one will fight against the illness a person is suffering from, and not the person himself. The greatest proof of this may be found in the fact that the winners at the Congress of Vienna in no way took advantage of their victory against France, which lost none of its territories when it reverted to being an honorable and highly esteemed monarchy. The divinely appointed monarchs of Europe were merely expiating their guilt, for they had risked losing their crowns and plunging their peoples in the turmoil of democracy a century before the date allotted by fate. The sovereign's guilt lay in the fact that, as far as short-sightedness goes, they had all managed to outdo Louis XVI. The latter had insisted on merely seeing casual movements of revolt due to contingent dissatisfaction in his country, where the revolutionary age was in fact dawning. Similarly, European monarchs yielded to petty nationalistic rivalries instead of standing as one man and forgetting about their ongoing differences, mere family squabbles by comparison, in such a way as they could have nipped the germ threatening the world in the bud before it could show itself and spread. Like far too many of our contemporaries, these rulers appear not to have realized that a new chapter of history was in the making. The 19th century was, par excellence, was that between overlapping social strata, the war of universal democracy against the universal elite, the war of the low against the high, the war of the most low against the most high, must follow on as a logical consequence. Where democracy triumphed, there the low became the high, and then had to defend itself against something lower still, which in turn was destined to find itself in the same situation as soon as it had attained power and supremacy. In principle, this was always the war of democracy against a relative aristocracy, and things were fated to continue in this way until we hit rock bottom. To this day, only Russia has reached absolute zero, below which there is nothing. Thus, it is the only country in history in which the revolution has come to a standstill and is not spreading any deeper. Instead, it is merely spreading, nor could things be any different. Against our claim that the Bolshevik Revolution has reached the deepest level, one might point out, on the contrary, it has yet to win the hearts of the vast majority of Russians. Anyone resorting to a similar argument, even in good faith, for many only adopt it to conceal the truth, shows he is no different from those who consider the modern revolution or democracy, which is nothing but an extension of the latter, as an expression of the people, by the people, and for the people. Actually, the revolution and democracy are only means employed as part of an overall conspiratorial plan aimed at stripping the positively aristocratic group, an idea that have always been above and beyond most of humanity, of their power over the people. The bourgeois revolution, democracy, the social revolution, and communism are but episodes in the vast conflict between two great principles, one embodied by integral Christianity and the other by the anti-church. If Satan rebelled in the name of freedom and equality vis-a-vis God, this was not merely so as not to serve. Rather, it was in order to subjugate others by replacing the legitimate authority of the Most High. The people, therefore, are not the subject, but the object of this evolution of alleged democratic progress, punctuated by violent revolutions accelerating its march. Human hierarchies remained after people had started to break away from Christ. The Renaissance, princes and kings endured after breaking away from the Pope and the Emperor. The Reformation. The bourgeoisie remained after turning away from the aristocracy headed by its kings and princes. The French Revolution. The people remained after transcending the plans of the bourgeoisie, 1848 to 1917. Once the masses themselves had been transcended, all that remained was scum led by the Jew, 1917. Once the revolution will have arrived at its lowest depth, as in Russia, and by extension, as will be the case once the entire world ends up looking like the decayed empire of the czars, it will not be concerned with what the people thinks any more than what we might be concerned with what our rams or oxen have in mind. For we know that a few pieces of artillery would be quite enough to exterminate all herd animals put together without the slightest risk on our part.